I read the Biden laptop book, Miranda Devine's book, Laptop from Hell, and the Bidens have been making excuses for Hunter of the sort that a relatively unsophisticated, dependency-enabling parent could make with some justification the first time their 14-year-old son committed a juvenile offense. But the manner in which they discuss Hunter's transgressions, or Hunter as a person, is reminiscent of exactly the language that you might use for a 14-year-old juvenile delinquent. And the problem with that is, I don't know if you've noticed, but he's not 14. He's 50. And whatever excuses might have been made for his behavior when he was a juvenile delinquent, they're completely off the table at 25, let alone 50. The Bidens portray Hunter as a victim of addiction and his criminal actions as a consequence of that victim-producing addiction. He's not a victim. And addiction's no excuse for criminality. And making excuses for your son when he's acting at 50 like a very badly behaved juvenile isn't an indication of your admirable empathy as a parent. It's an indication of your codependency, to use a relatively cliched term, and your pattern of pathological enabling of your son. Now, here's a hypothesis, and I'm not saying this is right. One of the things that really struck me about the Biden laptop story was that in the Biden family, Beau had always been put forward as the golden boy who was destined for glorious things such as the presidency, whereas Hunter was always mopping up the lavatory, so to speak. He was the black sheep of the family, from which little was expected, let's say. And, you know, if you end up playing that role, it's like you're the criminal shadow of your father. If you end up playing that role, I'll tell you what that's going to do. That's going to make you unbelievably angry. It's going to produce a kind of hatred of your parents, however unconscious, that's deep beyond belief. And maybe that accounts for why Hunter dropped off 3 water-damaged laptops. How do you water damage 3 laptops? A week before his father announced that he would run for the presidency, well knowing comprehensively just exactly what kind of horror show, multi-dimensional horror show, was available for view on those laptops. Now, you know, as a psychoanalytically minded psychologist, I can't help but see motivation there. There's a psychoanalytic dictum, which is, if you don't understand the motivation, look at the outcome. Okay, so why would Hunter drop off 3 laptops full of compromising information to a repair clinic a week before his father ran for presidency? Okay, what was the consequence? The emergence of a massive scandal surrounding Joe Biden. What was the motivation? How about that? Okay, and you think, well, you know, Dr. Peterson, you're reading too much into it. No one would possibly act like that. And first of all, if you think no one would possibly act like that, you know nothing. That's for sure. And you certainly don't know anything about malevolence or psychopathology. And then we could add another interesting detail to that I think lends credence to my hypothesis, which is that it was very shortly after Beau Biden died, so the golden boy disappeared from the scene and there was no one left but the bagman, that Hunter had an affair with his brother's widow, despite the fact that they both had children, then enticed her into a cocaine addiction, then filmed them having sex, and then uploaded the video to Pornhub with the title Lonely Widow. Now, you see, both of those patterns of action are, you might regard as circumstantial evidence, but they're strong circumstantial evidence pointing in the same direction, which was revenge, revenge, revenge. And my reading is Hunter was taking his revenge, maybe with his entire style of life, on the enabling idiocy of his parents, something which they have yet again engaged in. And now, so all the many Democrats have come out and said, well, any father would have done what Joe did. And that's not true. It's simply not true. At some point, if you're dealing with not only someone who's addicted in a manner that's tilting them very hard in at least quasi-criminal directions, so consorting with strippers and hookers and so forth, and spending way too much money in every possible mafia-like manner, as well as tangling himself up, becoming tangled up in all sorts of nefarious and quasi-nefarious business affairs. Your obligation as a parent is to stop making excuses and put up some bloody boundaries. And yet again, Joe failed in that. And the Democrats who've come to his support, have come to his side, proclaiming his virtues as a loving parent, have enabling and love seriously confused, which is actually a pathological element of the Democrat political platform. They do exactly the same thing with so-called trans children, confusing their empathy for those children and the moral capital they can generate by proclaiming that empathy with care for those children, which, if actual care was being manifested, the care would be, don't let 12 and 13-year-olds make decisions about their bodies, their sexual function, their reproductive capacity, and their long-term marriage and partnership when they're too young to be legally allowed to make any important decisions whatsoever. That's not love, it's not empathy, it's not admirable, it's enabling. And it's precisely the kind of enabling that people do when they have no imagination whatsoever for evil. And that means that they're naive cowards. And it's certainly the case that what Joe and Jill Biden manifested in the case of this pardon was the continuance of a pattern of unforgivable enabling of their quite seriously gone astray son. And they do treat him like a kid. He's not a kid, he's a 50-year-old man. And what he does is not excusable. He passed the line from victim to perpetrator long ago. And there's no reason to believe it will stop here. That's true, Joe. There is no reason to believe it'll stop here, because what you've done with your latest act is to continue the patterning of enabling that has encouraged your son to make his most pathological side manifest for the last 30 years of his adult life. And that won't stop because you didn't allow it to stop. And not only that, you accrued moral capital as a father, loving his son and therefore pardoning him. You accrued moral capital to yourself, as you indicate in that last sentence, by the way, in a manner that's extraordinarily destructive to your son. You know, you think that pity is the right emotion for your intelligent and privileged 50-year-old son. It would have been better if you would have punched him. It would have been better.